All right. My next duty is a pleasure. I'm going to introduce to you today's BMES Diversity Award winner, Ronke Olabisi. The BMES Diversity Award honors an individual, project, organization, or institution for outstanding contributions to improving gender and racial diversity in biomedical engineering. It's given for a broad range of activities, including research, education, and service, improving the diversity of our field. It recognizes lifetime achievements as well as innovative or high-impact activities over a short term. Ronke joined the UC Irvine BME department in 2020 and is affiliate faculty of the UC Irvine Sue and Bill Gross Stem Cell Research Center. She came from Rutgers University, where she was an assistant professor in BME with an affiliation with the Institute of Advanced Materials, Devices, and Nanotechnology. The focus of her lab is tissue engineering and regenerative medicine. By modifying synthetic materials with the natural, her lab develops cell-responsive materials. Specifically, her research has resulted in advances in wound healing, methods to form bone, and discoveries in retinal and neural tissue engineering. In addition to biomedical research, she conducts research aimed at increasing the recruitment and persistence of minoritized groups in STEM. For research, Olabisi is the recipient of a 2016 Engineering Information Foundation Award, a 2018 NSF Career Award, 2019 J&J Women in Science, Technology, Engineering, Mathematics, Manufacturing, and Design Award. That's a big one. A 2019 BMES Young Innovator in Cellular and Molecular Bioengineering Award, and a 2022 NSF Workshop Award. She's a member of 100 Year Starship, an interdisciplinary DARPA-funded initiative that seeks to replicate the rapid technological development stimulated by moon landings by imagining human interstellar travel. Cool. Olabisi earned her bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from MIT, 2 master's degrees in ME and aeronautical engineering from Michigan, and her doctoral degree in biomedical engineering from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She completed postdoctoral research in bioengineering at the West Lab, Jennifer West Lab, when it was at Rice University. Please welcome Dr. Olabisi. Yes, just a second.
Oh, sorry.
Here's your award. We'll put it back there for the, we have to get our pictures.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. Okay. I'm going to put this over here. I'm going to ask everybody, do you hear me clearly, or is there an echo? Okay. I tend to be loud, so I'm going to try not to. Okay. So I will wait. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the media. So there's going to be a lot of media in here, probably more than you've ever had in one of these talks. And I'm going to invite you to participate in this talk. And so here, I'm going to let everybody shine their cameras or plug it in or do how you do. And when it kind of feels like I'm in a concert. I see these little lights at the, okay. So I think everybody's gotten it so far. Okay. So if you are coming from a different place, just put on here where you came from. If you are joining us from online, put on here where you come from, and this just ensures that it works. And we can see, wow, it's lighting up. There's some people from Africa. There's people, oh, maybe not. Okay, somebody was confused. There's people coming from all parts of the world, from India, from, it looks like, not Taiwan, but Korea. A lot of people from the States, a lot of people, somebody from Australia. So I'm going to let you guys plug that in a little bit. And maybe I'll give the data to the coordinators here. And so I'm going to continue on, but I love seeing that everybody's joined us. Thank you for coming. And I'm going to talk about media. So I've always known the power of the media. This is me as a newborn. This is me when I was 6 months old. This is me when I was 16 months old. and this is me when I was 2 years old. And when I was a lot younger, people would always tell me that they would never let their future kids watch television. They only allowed to read books. But my response to that was, because of television, I began reading when I was 2 years old. And the reason for this was the first live action Spider-Man. It appeared on a show called The Electric Company, and it was kind of like an alternate Sesame Street. And because Marvel was trying to expand their fan base to preschoolers, they let the Electric Company air their version of Spider-Man without charging them any licensing fees. So it was completely free to them. And it was the perfect indoctrination into books for little kids, particularly comic books. And it opened on a traditional comic book drawing, which would have come alive with the live action Spider-Man. I loved it. It had everything. It was the perfect recipe to get me to read. It had Morgan Freeman. It had a little black girl that I identified with. And most importantly, it had the greatest possible motivation to learn to read. Every single character spoke except Spidey. He had thought bubbles that the characters would understand. And if you wanted to understand, then darn it, you better learn to read. And I wanted to know what Spidey was saying, so I learned to read. So I always understood the power of media, and I was always aware of race. My father is Nigerian, and my mother is African American. She is a black woman with light skin, red hair, and freckles. But being descended from slaves often means being of mixed race. And we had stories of her heritage that were passed down, but we didn't really know what she was until 23andMe. In any case, when she was growing up, there was segregation. It was just white or colored, the one-drop rule. So because of segregation, my mother went to all-black schools with all-black teachers. My father, being Nigerian, he went to all-black schools because he was in Nigeria. But education was very important to both of my parents. And so they sent me to private schools. And because they were private schools and there remains a huge racial wealth gap in this country, these schools were largely white. And I was almost always the only black person in my grade. And because my parents' generation did not know what that was like, my generation was one of the first to experience this. One of my most vivid memories that kind of explains what this feels like was while we were on a field trip in the 9th grade. And we were in AP Latin class in the back seat of our teacher's car, and a Japanese boy kept pointing out all the Asians on the street as we were driving. He was like, there's an Asian, there's an Asian, there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one, continually. And a white boy in the front got exasperated and asked if he always noticed where all the Asians were. And he had this confidence that I did not have at the time. And he just said, he looked at me and he said, do you notice where all the black people are? And he then said, when you were in Europe, did you notice where all the Americans were? And the white boy agreed that, yeah, he kind of had. He could hear the accents, he noticed where they are. And that's the closest analogy I've ever heard to explain to someone who doesn't understand. It's constantly being asked what America is like, wanting to practice their English with you, listening to their assessment of whether you meet the expectations of American, seeing other Americans and exchanging a smile or engaging in conversation. It means never forgetting your Americanness. Being the only black person in white spaces means never forgetting your blackness. It means answering questions about my hair, having strangers touch my hair without asking, having people ask me if I can talk black and being bewildered that I can't do so convincingly. People being shocked that I can't play basketball, jump double dutch, jump rope, being told that I could be a friend, but their parents would kill them if they dated a black girl. Being told that all black men look alike with the expectation that I would agree with them, and being confided in that when black men are walking on the street towards them, they cross the street. And the fear of black men that many of my white friends confided in me painted a picture like this: the scary black man. While most of the black men I know are like this.
I've been married long time ago. Where did you come from? Where did you go? Where did you come from, Cotton Eye Joe? Get out and Cotton Eye Joe. I've been married long time ago. Where did you come from? Where did you go? Where did you come from, Cotton Eye Joe? Get out and Cotton Eye Joe. I've been married long time ago. Where did you come from? Where did you go? Where did you come from, Cotton Eye Joe? Get out and Cotton Eye Joe. I've been married long time ago. Where did you come from? Where did you go? Where did you come from, Cotton Eye Joe?
Okay, so I want to understand this, and I love history. I love history when it's taught, especially through media. And my media of choice are books and television and movies. And so if we go a little bit into the history of dogs, bloodhounds were trained to hunt down convicts, Native Americans, and slaves, and they became very popular for this purpose. And as their popularity grew, so did fatal attacks by bloodhounds. In the North, bloodhounds weren't as popular as sled dogs. These had their own reputation, these sled dogs. They were called evil. They were called fierce. They were bloodthirsty. There was a fear of these dogs until the early 1900s. And then as the popularity of German Shepherds grew over the early part of the 18th century, they began to be known as these super killer predator dogs. And in fact, the very first ever official breed ban was of German Shepherds in Australia. They were banned in 1929. Next, collies. They became very popular. And in their popularity, their numbers swelled. And they too were responsible for increasing number of fatal attacks on people. However, because of favorable popular media, because of Lassie, because of stories like that, their attacks were more often placed in context than these other dogs. And despite an equally large number of fatal attacks, they were never fully demonized. Between 1929 and 1979, 50 years, the Doberman Pinscher became known as the super predator dog. And they were associated with Nazis because they were the guard dogs that Nazis used at that time. And the Nazis used to sick on their Jewish captors. So they were seen as homicidal guard dogs over these poor people. There were myths surrounding them, that their skulls never grew to accommodate their brains. I remember that from childhood, which resulted in these dogs going crazy. Despite their reputations, they never killed more people than retrievers did. Golden retrievers, Labrador retrievers. Fast forward to 1980. The breed of the dog prior to the 1980s was not the story. The attack was the story, with the breed being an added detail. Prior to 1987, dog attacks were viewed as a multifaceted problem based on the function of the dog, specifically guard dog, owner responsibility, loose roaming dogs, poor breeding practices, and the danger of children playing with unfamiliar dogs. More than anything, guard dog function was presented as the single most predominant factor in canine aggression, coupled with uneducated owners. The growing media bias has spiraled. Animal control officers across the country have told the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals that when they alert the media to a dog attack, news outlets respond that they have no interest in reporting on the incident unless it involved a pit bull. A quantitative study by the National Canine Research Council of dog bite reportage in a 4-day period over the same year, 2007, demonstrates that anti-pit bull bias in the media actually does exist. On August 18th, a Labrador mix attacked a 70-year-old man, sending him to the hospital in critical condition. Police officers arrived at the scene and the dog was shot after charging at the officers. This incident was reported in one article in the local paper. August 19th, a 16-month-old child received fatal head injuries and neck injuries after being attacked by a mixed breed non-pit bull dog. This attack was reported on twice in the local paper. August 20th, A 6-year-old boy was hospitalized after having his ear torn off and receiving a severe bite to the head by a medium-sized mixed breed non-pit bull dog. It was reported in one article in the local paper. August 21st, a 59-year-old woman was attacked in her home by 2 pit bulls and was hospitalized with severe but not fatal injuries. This attack was reported in over 230 articles in national and international newspapers, as well as major television networks, including CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. And the worst part about it all, in a study of 122 breeds by the National Temperament Testing Association, where they do things like poke and annoy the dogs to determine how far they must be pushed to become irritated, pit bulls achieved as good as or better results than golden retrievers. In addition to over-reporting, all the statistics come from the media, which misidentify 60% of all dogs. So what happens is that pit bull bites are over-reported because of media interest in misidentification. Pit bulls are perceived as dangerous dogs. Pit bulls are banned by politicians who believe this. Yet, because the problem is the state of being a guard dog, in other words, being a dog that is trained to bite people is the #1 risk factor for fatal attacks. Banning pit bulls does not fix this problem, but it does drive policy. What also happens is that people become afraid, including police officers. Police officer-involved shootings of pit bulls that were non-threatening or in their own yards or chained and well out of distance of the officer are increasing. This is problematic because some officers have accidentally shot people while trying to shoot the dog. And it also becomes a vicious cycle. For every person who avoids a dog because of a bad reputation, there is a person who wants that dog because of its bad reputation. The media says a dog is dangerous. Dangerous owners want that dog as their guard dog. That dog is now dangerous, perpetuating the myth and the popularity of this dog. And rather than compare guard dog behavior to non-guard dog behavior, the media covers only pit bull bites, misidentifies 60% of them, and perpetuates among the public and police that all pit bulls are dangerous. So understanding this demonization of a dog helped me to understand why so many of my non-black friends confessed a fear of black men to me.
I just love these boulevards down here, though.
Yeah.
You don't get this in most of LA.
How come whenever I'm out here, though, I turn on the 11 o'clock news and, I hear, tonight in South Central,
Right.
drive-by shooting, or tonight in South Central,
Yeah.
this, that, or whatever.
Right.
They're not making that up, are they?
No, they're not making it up, but they're choosing what they're covering. If you turn on TV, on the news,
Yeah.
what are you going to hear about? Dangerous black guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unnamed black guy who, accused of some crime, or
Right.
you're going to see pictures of black guys doing bad things and hearing stories about black guys doing bad things. And we've heard this our whole lives.
Now, the suspect is a black male in his 20s. We are told he has a large afro, sideburns. He was wearing a silver chain at the time.
Police say the suspect is a black man, 6'1", 160 to 180 pounds, about 35 years in age.
Suspect is a black male, ages 16 to 18.
The suspect is African-American. Police
say
the black man. Suspect.
The suspect
is a black male.
black man.
Black male.
Black man.
Susan Smith grounds her 2 children. She tells people a black guy
Right.
stole the car and stole the kids.
Right.
And everyone at first bought it.
Some guy jumped into a red light with her car with her 2 kids in it, and he took off. That's a black guy, she said.
Black male.
Yes, ma'am.
And I told him I loved him. I hollered I loved him.
And it's just a tragedy.
The anonymous, urban, which means usually black, male, comes by and does this. It's the excuse for all kinds of things.
Charles Stewart, the lawyer in Boston,
Right, exactly.
kills his pregnant wife, says a black guy did it.
Right.
Everybody buys it.
The suspect, described as a black male about 6 feet tall. Chuck and Carol Stewart were robbed at gunpoint as they left a Lamaze class. It seemed the ultimate urban nightmare.
The thing I love about this country of mine is that whether you're a psychotic killer or running for president of the United States, the one thing you can always count on is white America's fear of the black man.
We've heard the stories on the news and in the papers, and they have killed people. Killer bees, also known as Africanized bees.
I'm scared. I'm really worried with them.
Rosemary Shipley never expected a nest of Africanized killer bees to shack up across the street from her.
But I'm terribly allergic to them, and so are my grandkids.
They're originally from southern and eastern Africa. Dr. Warwick Kerr brought some to Brazil in 1956 and tried to mate them with the European bee, the kind that we're used to. But they got loose, took over, and moved all the way to the southern United States. The main difference between a traditional honeybee and an Africanized bee is the bee's aggressiveness. If I was to do this to an Africanized bee's hive, I could have several hundred stings in a matter of minutes. Danny Self raises the kinder, gentler European bees, and he's done the research.
The only way that you can tell the two of them is doing measurements on the body parts.
So even African American bees are scary. And so in analysis of New York police data and local New York news programming, it was found that the percentage of African American crime was overreported and European American crime was underreported. In analysis of 10 similar criminal cases that made national and local television news, 5 with a white defendant and 5 with a black defendant, there were stark disparities between the types of images used for black defendants. Almost half of the time, the media chose a mugshot for the black defendant, only 13% of the time for the white defendant. 8% of the time, black defendants were shown in jumpsuits, while white defendants were shown, were never, not once, shown in jumpsuits. White defendants were shown in suits 13% of the time, while blacks were shown in suits 6% of the time. And when homicides were reported based on the race of the offender and the race of the victim, black-on-black homicide is always within 8 percentage points as white-on-white homicides are. They found that for the most part, homicide is within your own race. The white-on-black and black-on-white homicide is a small fraction of homicide. But when we look at how it's reported in the media, media attention to black-on-black crime and white-on-white crime is roughly the same, the attention to it. But black-on-white crime is overrepresented, leaving people with the feeling that it is a lot higher than it actually is. Also, black-on-black crime is a term invented by the media which suggests that it's exclusive to blacks, while crime is largely intra-racial. But white-on-white crime is not a term that really exists in our milieu. The consequence of this is over-representation of black crime and making black-on-black crime and black-on-white crime seem much larger than it generally is. And so, as we saw with the pit bulls, this has a consequence with black men.
Former Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson told the grand jury that Michael Brown looked like a demon who might shrug off a hail of bullets before Wilson shot him dead. Shortly after, Cleveland police officer Timothy Lohman gunned down Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old holding a toy gun. He told the dispatcher that Rice, who was shot within 2 seconds of Lohman's arrival, was maybe 20. Milwaukee police officer Christopher Manny told investigators that Dontre Hamilton, an unarmed man whom he shot 14 times in October, was so big and muscular that he would be impossible to control if he were one man. At 5'7" and 180 pounds, Hamilton was below average height and overweight. Wilson, Lohman, and Manny are white, and Brown, Rice, and Hamilton were black. They were also unarmed. But in the eyes of the men who killed them, they were frightening enough to provoke the use of lethal force. These lingering, sometimes unconscious biases help explain why police encounters with black men are so much more likely to end fatally. The Supreme Court has held that police can use lethal force if they have a reasonable belief they are facing danger, or if a fleeing suspect poses a danger to others. Police kill white people far less often than they kill black people, relative to their proportion of the population. This has something to do with the way police see things. Police are people, after all, subject to the same flaws and vices as the rest of us. America's police departments tend to be whiter than the general population, and nearly half of whites believe many or almost all black men are violent. Whites overestimate the amount of crime, in particular violent crime, involving blacks. Black children, like Tamir Rice, are more likely to be mistaken as older, be perceived as guilty, and face police violence if accused of a crime. When society weighs whether the deaths of black men at the hands of police are reasonable, it does so with the additional burden of American beliefs about black criminality, black superstrength, black dangerousness.
Okay, so people aren't getting this from the ether. They're getting it from media. But black people are also getting it from media. The suicide rate in black kids is rising. Our caregivers are getting it from media. The consequence of portraying black men as super criminals is deadly. In many ways, the biases we hold spread to black children themselves, their caregivers, their educators. In 1947, Kenneth Clark and his wife, Mamie Phillips, developed this doll study that was instrumental in the Brown versus the Board of Education case. And it showed that black children in segregated schools overwhelmingly held negative attitudes about blackness. And when given the option of playing with black or white dolls, they overwhelmingly chose the white doll. And they used this to give the case that segregation was causing harm in black children. In 2009, the study was repeated by a high school girl who won an award for her film. It was repeated again in 2012. It wasn't just the segregation.
Can you show me the doll that you like best or that you like to play with?
This one. I like that one.
Show me. I can.
This one.
That one?
This one. I like to play with this.
And can you show me the doll that is the nice doll? And why is that the nice doll?
She's white.
And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay. And can you give, and why does that look bad?
Because it's black.
And why do you think that's a nice doll?
Because she's white.
And can you give me the doll that looks like you?
%71% of the kids picked the white doll. So, if the media can do all this damage and can do all this harm, how can we use it for good? If you are African American and you read articles of Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King, or watch positive media featuring African Americans prior to taking a test, your performance will not be as adversely impacted by stereotype threat. If you are unfamiliar with stereotype threat, it can be induced in anyone who is aware of a stereotype that their race has. If you are told that women do not do well in math, then take a math test. If you are female, your performance will drop. If you're a white guy in a room with many Asians and you believe that Asians are better at math, you will do poorly on that math test if this is pointed out to you. When given positive media of your identity group, you can overcome this. So when Obama had his stereotype-defining accomplishments shown, when it had a profound beneficial impact. That was called the Obama effect. There is also the Scully effect. Nearly 2/3 of women who are familiar with Dana Scully from the X-Files show say that she increased their belief in the importance of STEM. Also, 2/3 of women that work in STEM say Dana Scully served as their role model. Among women who are familiar with her character, 63% said she increased their confidence that they could excel in a male-dominated profession. Women who were medium to heavy viewers as middle school girls were 43% more likely than other women to have considered working in a STEM field than non-viewers. Medium to heavy viewers were 27% more likely to have studied STEM than non-viewers. And medium to heavy viewers were 50% more likely to have worked in a STEM field than non-viewers. And African American and women in STEM also cited Lieutenant Uhura as a positive role model. So there is this implicit bias test where you can measure the implicit biases that you have. It assesses the associations that you unconsciously hold. Now, it's controversial, but it can tell you what you hold at that moment, regardless of whether or not it is something that is your core belief. It's what you're feeling at that moment. It measures how quickly you can assign people to categories. For instance, if you're given a name and you're asked to identify whether you think it's a male or female name, usually you can do this pretty quickly. When the tests pair male with, say, something else, like career, generally people's performance is still fairly quick. If male is paired with career and female is paired with family. However, if you then pair male with family and female with career, most people's reaction time slows. And this is a measure of how much you associate male with career and male with family. And you can do the same thing with race. It is easier for many people to pair European with good than with African American. For most people living in this country, that is the case, unfortunately, even if the person taking the test is African American. However, this test is not fixed. You can take the test for Asians, for Latin Americans, for thin people, for overweight people. I find that my implicit bias towards my husband changes depending on whether he's done the dishes. Again, if you read articles of Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, you watched the Olympics where there's a lot of Black people performing, your positive associations with Black people are going to increase. So, if we know that we can change implicit bias, and we know that the way to do that is through positive, how do we harness this? Well, first we have to understand our privilege, and we have to understand how our privilege is contributing to include or contributing to exclude people. And the thing I notice about this famous picture is that they were all white, and this was taken during segregation. And you don't need diversity programs to diversify the movie theater. Diversity is the natural result of inclusion. So if I'm going to use the media to include excluded groups, what do I need to do this? And so first, I have to understand both their privilege and disadvantage. And I had grown up on both sides of the poverty line, from solidly middle class to after my parents' divorce when we struggled. And after my husband finished his training to become a surgeon, I suddenly changed my socioeconomic status dramatically, and I found it very uncomfortable. But having, and this is what a friend of mine told me when I was talking to her about how uncomfortable it was, but having privilege is not bad. It's what you do with that privilege that determines whether or not it's a good or a bad thing. And so nobody likes to do this, so I'm going to stand in my privilege space. Now, if this is the poverty line, the financial things that I had to worry about after my parents' divorce were numerous. Privilege has been defined as an invisible set of tools from an invisible knapsack to navigate the world. But I think an easier way is to think of privilege as what you don't have to worry about, because it's invisible to you. You don't worry about it. So the things that I worry about now are where to vacation, whether to get a Honda or a Kia, and what stocks to invest in. Those are my financial concerns. It's very different than what I was before. Being poor is being inconvenienced with everything. You balance whether or not to pay the electricity bill or the heat bill or the phone bill or the mortgage or to buy food or to buy, it's not just being able to meet all your bills with less money. It's not being able to make them. And it's usually associated with some form of shame. And because I did not have that privilege, I am very aware of what that privilege is now that I do. I also have heterosexual privilege, and I'll give you an example. When I say my husband in front of acquaintances, friends, or colleagues, they don't react. When a gay man I know referred to his husband in a mixed setting, all heads turned. I don't have to worry that people will think about me because of my orientation. My orientation is viewed as default, as normal. I don't have to wonder if they think less of me. I don't have to wonder if they'll let their kids play with mine, worry what my kids will learn that their best friends' parents describe my orientation as being a sin. I don't worry about any of that. I don't have to worry that people will harass me for going to the bathroom or ask invasive questions about my genitalia or sex life. I am by no means at my goal weight, but you don't have to be thin to have thin privilege. I can go to a clothing store and find a wide variety of clothes that fit. My weight hasn't cost me my health insurance. It has not increased my health insurance rates. I don't get constantly told by strangers that I need to lose weight or mooed at or yelled free willy at. Characters on television who are my weight do not exist to merely be the butt of jokes. I have Christian privilege. Every Christian holiday I want to take off is probably a national holiday, and I never have had to miss work or school to do so. I can find any variety of Christmas trees or music or nativity scenes without any effort. I can find Christmas movies easily, and I don't have to explain what I do on Christmas to anyone. And finally, I have standard American English privilege. People assume I'm more intelligent than, say, someone who speaks with a rural accent or an African American vernacular English accent. People don't use my accent as the butt of jokes. If I call the police, and I have, a SWAT team showed up. Now, I'm going to invite you to stand in your privileged space. Men only, can you please answer this next question? I'll give you a minute. I can't tell if no one has any answers or if it's loading. No responses. Okay. Oh, you guys got kicked out? It should say at the top of the screen, pollev.com/ronkeolabisi. Or you can text ronkeolabisi to 22333, and you text it once, and then you should be able to text your message. And if that doesn't work, it's unimportant. I can describe. Does anybody have anything? Okay, this is only for men. Okay, I'm going to assume either you have no answers or that it's not working, and if it's not working, I will describe. Okay, this one's for women. Okay, I'm going to assume it's not working. So generally, when this question is asked to a mixed audience, men typically will have one or two answers, maybe three. Women tend to have a lot of answers. I myself, how many women here have had a rape whistle that was given to them that they kept, or a mace, or have learned to put their keys in between their fingers and hold in a fist while they walked, or texted somebody, I'm leaving now, and I'll be there in 20 minutes. Call the police if I don't arrive. So, or all constantly looking over your shoulder. I think it's safe to say a lot of the women in this room have walked home scared at some point in their life. My brother never has. So, talk a little bit about white and male privilege. White or male privilege is being perceived as the default, the regular. I was once asked by a good friend of mine how my hair was different than regular hair. In the news, if it is a non-white person, the race is always mentioned. If it is a white person, it is the default. This doesn't say video of white teenagers and a Native American man, it says video of teenagers, because here white is the default. This says why some people didn't wear masks during the height of this pandemic. Well, Black Twitter lit up and was attacked for saying that it was white people until a study showed that it was largely white people who refused to wear masks and protested. So, In terms of male privilege, a lot of PPE doesn't fit women. And during the coronavirus, it was a problem. Many police vests, even armor, doesn't accommodate women's breasts, and it causes the vest to rise up, exposing the area that it should be protected. And vehicle safety systems are designed for the standard default male, and women are 17% more likely to die and 47% more likely to experience serious injury than men are in a car crash. So intersectionality is not the addition of experiences that Black men and white women have. Like if a white woman gets catcalled walking down the street and a Black man has someone cross the street to avoid them, I don't have people crossing the street to catcall me. So it's not this. It is more like a cross product where the intersection comes orthogonal to everything else, and it is new experiences. So Black women, if this works, what are some of the things that you deal with regularly as a Black woman? Okay, I'm going to assume that it's not working, and I will move on. But I can give a list. I think I gave a list already about hair. It's a lot of hair, a lot of hand-touching hair. Yeah, people asking about the hair. Okay, thank you. I'm gonna move on. And I'll give an example of what I have to deal with as a Black mom. And normally, I only have toys for my kids that have Black and Asian people in them. And in case you can see, these Legos do. However, the ones on this box in particular did not. This was not a gift from me, but from a family member who is the majority in their native country. So I offered my daughter, hey, you want me to buy some figures that are like me and you, and then we can play? And she said no. She preferred the white ones. And now I was essentially hearing the same thing as those experiments with the dolls. And I was perplexed. We don't watch TV. There's no movies that I've allowed that did not have at least one Black character. Moana was welcome, Frozen was not. I was very careful about this. Why? So after some probing, I realized that it was because the Black figurines were excluded. So she thought that they were in timeout. If they're not there, they must have been bad. So if you know me, you know what I did next. I disappeared all the white dolls and I said, oh, they had to go. And she is happily playing with the Black dolls that are like her now. And every mom to a Black child I know has had to deal with some version of this. There are very many white people who are against critical race theory because they worry it will make their kids feel guilty about being white. And I get that. Never mind, though, that it's been only taught in law school. But then now there are rules that are making teachers afraid to bring up race at all in the classroom. And I remember being very uncomfortable every time the N-word was spoken while we read Huckleberry Finn out loud, or wondering how my Jewish friends felt every anti-Semitic characterization of Fagin in Oliver Twist. If we can't talk about race, we shouldn't be reading these books either, or reinforcing the stereotypes in those books through the media of books. And so, understanding everybody's intersectionality, I didn't want to just be a self-advocate, I wanted to be an ally, and that meant understanding. So I worked with the national academies to gather a lot of data on the subject. Latin Americans are often faced with census forms that do not reflect their identities and only allow them to choose Black or white when they may identify as brown or mestizo. Some prefer Latinx, some prefer Latinx, because it reflects the language and the language's rules. Some loathe the word Hispanic, some do not. To be an ally in a war means that their fight is your fight. You have to be willing to lose something. And if that's your time, then that is what you lose to be a true ally. To be an ally, I should be aware of the issues before I dive in. If equitable representation means the proportion in STEM matches the portion in the population, then white men are overrepresented in STEM by 158% over their expected share, while white women are underrepresented, reaching only 58% of their expected share. Black and Latino women comprise 15% of the US population, but only 4% of the science and engineering workforce, placing them at 29 and 25% respectively of their expected numbers. Lumping Asian Americans into broad strokes can erase the experiences of many, and although in general, if you lump them all together, as most data does, Asian men and women are overrepresented in STEM. This is not often the case with Asian American men and women. In STEM occupations, Asian American women are at 62% of what you would expect. For instance, immigrant Asian men comprised 0.48% of the computing workforce in 1960. By 2009, their representation soared to 14%. In contrast, Asian American men composed 1.25% of the computing workforce in 1960, and in 2009, they still made up only 1.8%. And the tendency to combine immigrant Asians with Asian Americans in university and government censuses can give the impression that Asian Americans are well represented. And this is not the case, and it's problematic for those who want to include them in affirmative action programs. And finally, Asian Americans are more likely to have encountered Asian-directed racism in childhood and grown up with a dearth of role models than their immigrant counterparts. So I didn't want to forget anybody, and I wanted to understand everybody. And also, there are huge differences in education and poverty, and these are lost when they're aggregated. And so these differences can be directly linked to the US immigration policies, such as the Chinese Exclusion Act, followed by the 1965 Immigration Act, which prioritized highly educated Asians or targeted certain Asians to fulfill labor shortages. And Asian immigrants who came as refugees fleeing war are more likely to suffer poverty than those who were considered highly desired because of their education. And even when aggregating US-born and immigrant Asian women, despite holding doctoral degrees at disproportionately higher rates than the US population, they're the least represented demographic group with academic tenure and are almost completely missing from full professor positions. And so in 1986, the Research Council Committee on the Education and Utilization of the Engineer, they developed this model to predict the availability of sufficiently trained science and engineering workforce. And all of the committee members were engineers, and they created this mathematical flow model with input and output and flow, and it was complete with intricate schematics of this complex looking circuit that lended itself to a powerful leaky pipeline metaphor. And that metaphor drove policy and research for the next 20 so years, and it continues to persist despite repeated efforts to replace it. And initially it was used to describe the loss of white men from STEM, but it has shifted towards describing the loss of women and underrepresented minorities. And from the outside looking in, the loss of these groups certainly appears as a passive loss. However, an increasing number of reports focusing on the perspectives of the women and the minorities leaving STEM describe it more as a gauntlet, with both active, like sexual harassment, racism, microaggressions, and passive, like boring classes, forces that are driving them out. And this gauntlet begins as early as kindergarten, with messaging on which toys are appropriate for girls or better suited for boys. And this messaging comes in the form of parents, teachers, peers, and media. And so in an attempt to visualize this perspective of what it was like for the people leaking from the pipe, we created this satirical gauntlet type image. And if you move it around, all the comments are comments that were told to respondents. These are the bad actors that do not exist in a passive leaky pipe. And if you think the pipe is leaking, then you caulk it. If you think the climate is chilly, you train women to wear a sweater to become more resilient. If you approach it like a gauntlet, you remove the obstacles and the bad actors. The gauntlet has things that people love, like experiments that you did as a kid that were fun. There's what it feels like watching what seems like an easy path for the straight white males. But again, we weren't saying it was easy, we were saying that it could feel this way. There are the role models, the positive programs, the imposter syndrome, the peer mentors, the microaggressions, the first paper that you get. We tried to encapsulate it all. And initially, I had created a program where I invited female sophomores to conduct research in an all-female environment with mentors, because the current model requires that they go out and ask for research opportunities, and female students statistically ask less for research opportunities than their male peers, especially if they receive prior rejection. I taught them to identify a gap in the literature, form hypotheses, design experiments, conduct and analyze the experiments, and submit papers. And this was all mentored research, but it was all from their own ideas. And they all presented their research at BMES. But then, after having developed the gauntlet, we saw that most of the loss was in kindergarten. And so I decided to try to reach out via media. And when I did this Vanity Fair article, Black moms started reaching out to me about STEM. When the NSF exploited the popularity of zombies and had an escape velocity symposium, I joined and advertised with social media and engaged with several young people in the audience. When the Lydia Hill Gina Davis Institute on Gender Media funded a new show to recreate the Scully effect, but with actual female scientists and engineers, I jumped at the chance to be included. They're still looking for women to cover, so I have their contact information. Podcasts reached out about STEM. Scholastic, the books, reached out about partnering with them. And the Scholastic books are designed to be culturally relevant. So any race can't be swapped in. Like, you just can't switch out the person by changing their color. A Black girl might read about doing STEM after their mom braids her hair. A Chinese girl might read about making dumplings with her nai-nai. Or a Latina girl might read about making tortillas with her abuela. It's meant to reflect the girls reading them. And the curated books are really being taken up right now by a lot of schools, and so we're very excited about that. And then I added social media to my outreach, and if you are looking for young people, TikTok is the way to go because it has the most young users of any of the social media platforms, and I highly recommend developing or having one of the young people in your lab who understands TikTok, developing a platform for your social media. And so I described my research in here, and as you can see by the yellow arrow, 22,000 people watched that, and so 22,000 people now know what I do. I initially ran a workshop to help postdocs and grad students with their faculty applications, and in exchange I collected their contact information to help diversify the applicant pool, and I converted this into an online workshop available for viewing. And this woman had a great recommendation. If you are trying to understand the disadvantages that a group that you don't understand you would like to know, follow them on social media. Follow a Black person, follow 50 people of color, follow a trans person if you want to understand their perspectives and their disadvantage. And don't say, well, actually, or not all, just listen. And it's a good way. I've learned so much following certain YouTubers about groups that I had no experience with. And I use both traditional and social media to find Latin American, Asian American, and people with disabilities to speak in our seminar series in order to diversify this seminar series with intent. And I redesigned my classes with universal design in mind. So if you think about universal design, sidewalk curb cuts that were originally intended for people using wheelchairs are now used by able-bodied people most. So they're used by caregivers pushing strollers, people on skateboards, people dragging luggage, delivery workers pushing carts. By designing for the most disadvantaged, everyone benefits. And likewise, affirmative action was originally intended to give African Americans access to higher education in areas which they had been denied. But white women were also denied, and as a result, affirmative action has helped white women more than any other group. And I did not understand the importance of closed captions in my classes because I hadn't had any deaf students. And I had always told myself that I would make that accommodation when I had a deaf student. And then I attended meetings with students with invisible disabilities, and they had various learning disabilities. And they were very candid and told us what helped them. And they said that closed captions were essential for them getting the information from multiple sources, that being able to watch the lecture over and over again was critical for their success. And then I realized that accommodation put the burden on the student with the disability to ask for help, while accessibility made the class available to everyone. And so I retooled all my classes to be hybrid, and obviously the pandemic helped a lot with that because I had recorded lectures. And I had a script so that there were less throughout the lecture. I corrected the automatic closed captioning so that it would be accurate. And by flipping the class, I made sure that lecture content would be viewed by all on their own time. And what I found surprised me. I expected the students with disabilities to be the most users, but student athletes really appreciated the format because they did not have to fall behind. Religious minorities appreciated the format because they did not have to fall behind during their holidays. And by designing for the most disadvantaged students, I helped students that I was not even aware of. And through online media, I tapped into various different bystander training. This bystander training works for any group. And so I repeated this bystander training for Asian Americans when they were being attacked during the pandemic. I repeated the bystander training for Islamic students when they were suffering Islamophobia. And I highly recommend you look on social media. They used to be called Hollaback, and now they recently changed their name. But if you look for Hollaback, you can find their bystander training, and it is helpful. It is helpful to stop a racist or homophobic or Islamophobic or anti-Semitic comment in its tracks, or anti-Black comments in its tracks as it is happening. And if you are wondering, but I am not this, I am not that, I am not this, I am just a regular white person, what can I do? I can't put myself on social media. All of my mentors have been white people. I never had a Black teacher or a female teacher while I was being educated the whole time. The first female mentor I had was in my postdoc, and she has put me in touch with all kinds of opportunities. And so all you have to do is want to. Guilt is not a good motivator. If you're doing it because you feel guilty, don't do it, because guilt turns into resentment. If you're doing it because you care, get on social media, get on media. You can educate yourself with that, and you can put out stuff about your work, and you can bring in more students to you. I've had students from around the country now who have touched in with me, and we've done virtual research opportunities for students in economically depressed areas. So I highly recommend that you get your undergrads who know TikTok to put your work out there. And with that, I hope I did not go over, and I would like to thank you. I can't see anybody.
Hi, everyone. I think people are probably running to the social. Let's thank Dr. Olabisi again for a wonderful talk. And for all the students out there who might be sort of shy, don't be shy at this moment. Come up and talk to her. Social. That's the